Anyway, the news of the day. Following this morning's Supreme Court decision that the Rwanda policy is unlawful, the Prime Minister this afternoon announced government plans to introduce emergency legislation to declare Rwanda a safe country. He also said he will not allow a foreign court to block the deportation flights. Here's what he had to say late this afternoon.
We'll take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. I told Parliament earlier today that I'm prepared to change our laws and revisit those international relationships to remove the obstacles in our way. So let me tell everybody now, I will not allow a foreign court to block these flights. When I said I would stop the boats, I meant it. Today's judgment has not weakened my resolve, it has only hardened it, and we will deliver that too.
The court, the Supreme Court, which incidentally isn't a foreign court, upheld the Court of Appeal's ruling earlier this year that Rwanda cannot be considered a safe country, owing to the substantial grounds for believing that asylum seekers would face a real risk of ill treatment by reason of refoulement. Refoulement is that they would be returned to the country from which they were seeking to leave because they were refugees. This was all explained in the judgment of the Supreme Court. But it's important to remember the ruling relates to UK's domestic laws passed through Parliament. The UK does not necessarily need to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights to overturn this ruling. The ruling reflects the compatibility of the Rwanda policy with our own law. There is no superior law in this country since we left the European Union. There are international agreements, but no international agreement can override UK law because of the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. So the issue here is the international treaties, of which the UK is a signatory, are sometimes reflected in our domestic law. We have a dualist system. We sign up to international law, but it can only have effect if Parliament says it can. In other words, laws such as the Human Rights Act 1998 and others that reinforce the international treaties, such as the Refugee Convention and the European Convention of Human Rights, are the laws that end up blocking the Rwanda policy. Our judges cannot enforce foreign law. They can only enforce domestic law since we left the European Union. So, if we're to make Rwanda work, we must amend those domestic laws, and in doing so, override international obligations, which anyway don't have courts particularly that can interpret them. The European Convention of Human Rights does, but international treaties don't necessarily. As the Prime Minister said, he will not allow a foreign court to block deportations, but this isn't particularly relevant because it's been blocked by a domestic court. Historically, we've ignored the ECHR, as we did on prisoner voting rights, when for 10 years or more we didn't do what they wanted us to do. And we could do the same for the question of Rwanda. But there is something quite telling about this ruling. Suella Braverman's scathing letter to the Prime Minister alleged that in exchange for her support during the leadership contest, the Prime Minister promised to include notwithstanding clauses to small boats legislation that would block the operation of the aforementioned domestic laws that inhibit the Rwanda policy. In fact, looking into some old amendments, we found two of them that earlier this year would have done exactly this. As you can see, this amendment stipulates that the section in question will have effect notwithstanding rulings from the ECHR or other international law obligations. And this other amendment would have blocked the operation of the Human Rights Act 1998. These amendments would have meant that the Supreme Court would have ruled in favour of Rwanda had they passed. But the government, Prime Minister, did not support them, so they did not pass. And the question is, will Rishi Sunak now do enough? Is he willing to exercise the sovereign will of Parliament, or will it go off half-cocked once again? As always, I want to hear from you. mailmog@gbnews.com.